Hi everyone, Fiona Maria Williams here from FionaMariaWill.ca, and welcome to my podcast on the ego, what it is not and what it is. So as a teacher of A Course in Miracles for 7 years and as a student of the course for 12 years, I've learned a lot about the ego mind, what it is, and its very sly dynamics, and even the ego's laws of chaos, all of which are exposed in A Course in Miracles. And so also on my spiritual path, though, I've come across many people who have the wrong idea about what the ego is and how they're actually trying to fight against it or make friends with it, both of which reinforce the ego in your mind. So just with all of this convolution going on about what the ego is, I just wanted to help bring some clarity to this subject so you yourself are able to identify the ego at work in your life and then simply move beyond it. So what the ego is not is it is not your friend. It does not help you in your daily life or motivate you positively or anything like that. The ego is the representative of the thought system of fear. It is the representative of the thought system of separation, or as Eckhart Tolle would say, the small self. So that is the ego mind. And the ego mind experience is very painful. And now the reason why the ego mind experience is painful is because at the level of the mind, we're all connected. So if you're familiar with Gary Renard's work, Gary Renard is an author who has helped, through his teachers, Arten and Persa, has helped bring clarity to A Course in Miracles and its principles. And in Gary's book, Love Has Forgotten No One, his teachers, Arten and Persa, share with him that at the level of the unconscious mind, we all know that we are connected. We all know that we are one. But we have this experience of the conscious mind when we are awake and working throughout our day and going about our day. This is the conscious mind experience, and this is where we experience ourselves quite adverse from connected. We experience ourselves as separate. So, there's 7 billion odd people in the world right now, and, it just looks and appears that we are different and that we are separate entities. And this is the ego conscious mind experience. And even Jesus says in A Course in Miracles that consciousness, the conscious mind, is correctly identified as the domain of the ego. And so, this is what's going on. And as we move about our daily waking life, when we are identified with the ego mind, we are actually just working throughout our daily working life to seek to maintain the ego and our different separate identities. And this is a painful experience because we're trying to encourage separation, but at the core, we're all connected. So essentially what we're doing is we're living a life of disconnect when we are actually connected. And that is why it's a painful experience, because we're trying to be something that we're not. And so, when you try to separate things that are meant to be together, that is always a very painful experience. Also, part of the ego separation experience is that it's very unsettling. So I invite you to just take a look, reflect upon your daily life experience with your mind. So, are you an anxious person? Are you, someone who just has a general malaise in your thinking and, it's a bit depressed? Are you easily agitated? Are you a scattered thinker? Are you someone who is just very much feeling guilty about some things about the past? What type of thoughts dominate your day? What type of thinker are you? A worrier, depressed, whatever it might be. And all of those things seek to maintain the ego. That's the way the ego thinks, is it has us distracted, it has us scattered, it has us focused on the past and feeling guilty about the past and worrying about things for the future. It does that as a distraction. Okay? It's a distraction to keep us away from the truth. And that truth is that we are one with God, one with love, one with everyone else. And so we know that at the level of the unconscious mind. So in the conscious mind experience, the ego has us, defending our separation, defending the separated self, because that's what the ego is. And so it needs to distract us, with just these daily events and these problems, so that we don't look at the truth and we don't recognize what we really are. Because when we recognize what we really are is far more loving and beautiful of an experience than anything the ego could ever offer us. And so we could change our mind about it. And the ego knows that we could change our mind from thinking with the ego to being loyal to the God mind. And then the ego is then eradicated. And of course, that is obviously very threatening to the ego. Like, we are trying to kill it by identifying with God or love or source, whatever you want to call it. And so this is why the ego distracts us. And it's a very unsettling experience. The ego mind experience is to just simply distract us from the truth, so the ego can survive. And, I know many people who are say, Fiona, I just had a horrible sleep last night, and then I woke up in the middle of the night and I just couldn't shut my brain off and all of that jazz. And that's just ego. It's just the distraction of the ego. And when you believe that you are the ego and you're identified with that ego mind, that distraction is going to continue. You are going to continue to feel that way. And, so this is where we can bring about practices like meditation, like mindfulness, like yoga, like going for a run, exercise, whatever it might be, because those types of things help to train the ego mind to quiet down, to calm down. And then we feel more relaxed, and then we actually are able to tap into the God mind, which is actually takes up a larger part of our mind. It is just a tiny little part of our mind that is having this ego experience, and the vast, vast, vast part of our mind, that is so large and one with creation itself, that mind knows what we are and knows the truth. And so it's just this tiny little piece of our minds that is trying to grasp at straws to keep itself alive. And so, that is why the ego mind experience is a very unsettling one. And so another way that the ego keeps us separated and wanting to remain that way is through conflict, right? So if I look at another human being, the ego needs us to remain separated, because if we unify, then that's death to the ego, right? That's one part of the ego that's died, because we've unified at the level of love. And so the ego needs us to remain conflicted with each other. So that's why you might find, when you're just even out just walking the dog and you see someone else, that you might experience like a conflicted thought about them, like a judgment about them. And it's just the ego that's just trying to pry you apart from the oneness that we are with others, right? So, this is something to be aware of. So what is your daily mind experience like when it comes to others? And so are you finding yourself judging others a lot? Or, is there a type of person that you're always attacking in your mind? Or, what is it? Are you just overly focused on conflict? And again, that's just a way to keep us apart so we don't unify and destroy the ego. And so Jesus teaches in A Course in Miracles that all conflict stems from comparison. And comparison stems from judgment. So it is our ego judgment that says, oh, Fiona, you need to compare yourself to that person that you see there. And so then I'm either seeing myself as better than someone else or less than someone else. So I've just either attacked them or attacked myself, and in reality have just attacked everyone altogether. But when we've done that, when we've now compared ourselves, conflict is the result. There is no good that comes from comparison, and therefore there is no good that comes from judgment. You don't know. I don't know. My ego mind has no bloody idea what another person is going through, what led them to be in the position that they're in, who they are, what they're all about. I don't know. My ego mind doesn't know, and your ego mind doesn't know either. And it doesn't matter. And so we, have to be vigilant for that ego tactic that tries to keep us separated and tries to deceive us that we are somehow different. And so we need to avoid, and train our minds not to judge others, okay? Because then we won't compare, and then we won't be conflicted. So when we go back to that unsettling experience of the ego mind and taking a look at how we live our lives throughout the waking day, so we're unsettled. We believe in that tangential thinking where we go off on those tangents and we believe everything the ego says. We're judging others, we're comparing, we're conflicted, and then we're exhausted at the end of the day. And so Jesus teaches in A Course in Miracles that this is actually why we are exhausted at the end of the day, is because we have literally been conflicted and agitated the whole day because we've been thinking with the ego. So just kind of get an idea for how you're thinking throughout the day, and how exhausted do you feel at the end of the day, and it will be a result of how you've been thinking and who you've been thinking with. So again, the ego is not your friend. And the other thing that it is not is that it is not some snarling demon in the depths of hell. Okay, the ego is actually just misthought. It is a mistake in human thinking, and that's all that it is. So there is a paradox that Jesus teaches in A Course in Miracles, and it's called the ego paradox. And what that is that the ego strives to keep itself alive by using our profound mental power, right? The ego knows how powerful our minds are, and so it uses that to keep itself alive. So we believe in the ego. We've invested in it for absolute eons. We believe that it's true. This entire physical universe speaks of the ego and maintaining the ego. And so the ego then uses our mind to keep itself alive, but then it tells us that we're vulnerable and that we're victims and that we're powerless. So it uses our mind because it's powerful, but then the ego tells us that we're not powerful. And so what this does is this keeps us small. You hear people say, oh, you've been playing small. Yeah, what that means is you've been identifying with your ego, straight up. And so there's no good that comes from the ego paradox. And one of the reasons why I teach A Course in Miracles is because I am so passionate about you knowing who you really are, how powerful you really are. And I really, really, really want to help educate others on how their minds function so they start using their minds for themselves, for the love which they are, as opposed to using their minds against themselves. And when you identify with the ego, you are using your mind against yourself. Okay, so there's one thing that I did want to touch upon, just on the spiritual path. I hear a lot of people go, oh, but I think we need the ego. Like, that's where my pride comes from, or that's where my motivation comes from, or that's what keeps me, alert to, traffic laws and all that stuff. The ego doesn't do that. That is not what the ego does. And so if you look at the intention behind your motivations, you will see whether if you are coming from ego or whether you are coming from love, okay, the God mind. So we'll use as an example going to the gym, right? So if you get up and go to the gym in the morning, some people will be like, my ego made me do that. Okay, well, what was the intention behind you going to the gym? Was it to just get like a rock hard body so you look better than other people? So you are better than others, you look better in clothes than others, and it's a flaunting thing. What is it? Or is it that sense of, false pride, like, ooh, I am a body, I am this separated self, like, look how amazing I am? That's a false intention. That's false motivation, and that's false pride, and it will lead to pain. It is a motivation that is seeking to keep you separate, to keep you different, to keep you better than others. And that's not what you really are. You're actually equal with others. We're all the same. We're all equal. And so if you change the motivation to love and the intention behind that motivation. So personally for me, as a student and teacher of A Course in Miracles, I work out because it's healthy for my body. I want to use my body for loving communication. It is a vessel of communication, the communication of the Holy Spirit, and that's the work I've chosen to do in this world, and that's what I want to use this body for. So when I work out, it's to help maintain the health of this body so I can do that longer, and I feel energized and good enough to do that type of work that I want to do in the world and to be truly helpful. And so that's a loving motivation. So you want to look at the intentions behind what you do things, because the ego will try and be very, very sneaky with you and try and get you to do things so you remain separate and different, okay? And you don't want that, because that separateness will cause you a great deal of pain, because you're meant to be connected and one with everyone. And so, you want to be very aware of when you're doing that. Another thing I wanted to touch upon is that we all know, all of us here are walking on this planet, know the experience of feeling that kind of charge you get, right, with the ego. And I know that this can be an attractive quality, right? This is why people want the last word in an argument, right? Or, they want to one-up someone or retaliate against someone, because you get that charge from the ego that's like, boom, like it's like a power surge. And you're like, oh, that felt so good. But did it really? And is it going to last? No, it's not going to last. It's false. It's something that has hurt you. It's caused you pain. And it's not a real power surge. It's something that's so harmful to you. And so it also just maintains the ego. So if you go through your daily life trying to one-up people, trying to be right, trying to correct people and all of that stuff, you're just maintaining your ego and you're living off of a charge. And if you have noticed, the charge is kind of addictive and you seek to have more of the charge. So you're just using conflict to feel the charge and keep yourself, afloat, to keep yourself alive. And it's just the ego that you're seeking to maintain when you do that. And there's no living there. There's no peace within you when you have to go and try and be right all the time. That's the ego. That's the ego charge. If you could just step back and imagine for a moment, if you didn't have to judge anything at all. Imagine walking by someone on the street and not thinking anything of them and just having that peace in your mind. And that's inner peace. And A Course in Miracles says that, mental health is inner peace. So not having to judge, not having to argue, not having to conflict. You don't need to argue for what you really are. You're perfect love. That requires no defense. You are love. And so you can relax and be confident, like truly confident in who you really are and being truly loving. And, there's just nothing but genuine peace there and a feeling of genuine joy. And you actually enjoy things more when you come from a place of the God mind, of the love mind, because it's unifying. And unifying thoughts are healing. Right? Because we think we're separate, and when we unify, then that means that separateness is healed, and now we're feeling connected. So you can absolutely go through this physical experience connected with the God mind, because that's what your real mind actually is, and it's always with you. So the Holy Spirit, which holy means whole, and spirit is, what we are, it's mind, it's that formless creative source, that's always with you within your mind. So you can use that throughout your day to guide you throughout your day, when you're driving, when you're having conversations, when you're deciding what to have for dinner, anything at all. That good, loving, beautiful, creative mind is with you to guide you correctly. And it will be done, everything that you do will be done with equal love for everyone involved. And it's an incredible feeling to come from that loving place of loving intention. So we want to be aware of who we're identifying with. And like I said, we have an ego habit going on, and it's not going to last forever, but it's up to us in our conscious mind waking experience to be vigilant. To be vigilant and recognize when we're thinking with the ego, but most importantly, when we're taking the ego seriously. Okay, so we get into trouble when we take ego thoughts seriously. So, anxiety is a classic example of that, right? Why are people anxious? Because they had a fear thought in their mind and they took it seriously. And now they're afraid. They're sitting on their couch, totally safe, and they are bloody terrified. And that is because they took an ego thought seriously. And it's not just with anxiety, it's anything else. Thinking that someone has said something about us or whatever it might be. And then we take it seriously and then we've reacted, right? And then it's okay to have an ego thought. It's okay to have a negative thought, but you don't need to take it any further than that. And that is what we need to be vigilant for throughout our day. So I'll use an example. My sister and I were shopping one day at the mall, and a girl happened to walk by who had a very loud outfit, just loud colors, and it was a bit busy, and certainly, not something my sister would wear. And boom, right away my sister's like, oh my goodness, look at that outfit. Oh, it's horrible. Snap judgment, right? Which we all make, and it's fine. But in the next second, my sister looked at me with these huge puppy dog eyes, and she felt horrible that she said something like that about a girl's outfit, and she just felt terrible. And so we can take a look at what happened there. So first of all, my sister had a thought about a girl's outfit, fine, but she took it seriously, right? And then she actually said what the thought was, okay? That was a mistake, and that's fine. But then she took it one step further, and then she felt really, really guilty for saying that. So whenever you feel guilty for thinking with the ego, that's still ego. That's more ego. That's the ego getting you again. It's going, see, now you feel like shit. Awesome. Right? That's what I need, because now you feel separated, you feel horrible, you feel different, and that keeps me, the ego, alive. So, what I said to my sister was, stop, don't feel bad. It wasn't you. It was just the ego mind. That's all. Don't take it as you. It's not you. Let it go. Right? And the more we learn to let it go, the more we train our minds to relax and not take the ego seriously, we're not going to invest in it as much anymore, and we're going to begin to let it go. We're letting go of that ego habit. So, also just be very aware of where you're feeling super duper guilty for giving into the ego, and especially people who, are very altruistic or, on the healing path or on the spiritual path. They can feel a lot of guilt when they don't get things perfectly right. That's still ego. Don't give in. Just recognize, when the ego's speaking, when you've taken it seriously. It's okay to have a negative thought, but you do have a choice not to take it any further than that. You can simply ask for the correction in your thinking and just go, that wasn't me. Okay? So if you can tell by that example, what I'm inviting you to do is not fight your ego, just let it go. Let it go. That's not me. I don't need to go there. You don't even need to take those thoughts that far. It's just like, no. Okay. Recognized that was an ego thought and moving on. And it really is that simple. But then, you're not giving any more fuel to that ego fire. You're just moving on. Okay, so another thing I did want to mention is just because, that false pride that I was talking about, the ego so much wants us to, be proud and things like that. And I just wanted to touch upon that because, you don't want that false sense of pride. Yes, it's awesome to go, I really loved that I tapped into love there and that I expressed love. I'm really happy I handled that way. That felt amazing, and wow, that felt incredible. I want to do that more often. That's a nice way of thinking of things, right? And so, we're all allowed to have our talents. We're all allowed to have our gifts. We're all allowed to have these qualities of love, because love is what we are. And, the ego would say, oh, that person can do that better than you, or you can do that better than someone else, and therefore you're better, or they're better than you. Again, there's that separateness where the ego tries to use pride against us. It tries to use whatever, talents or gifts that we have against us. And then we are again in conflict with others. You want to take a step back and recognize that whatever gifts you have are just what you happen to choose to have in this physical life experience. And it doesn't make you better than other people, and it doesn't make you less than other people. So don't set up those differences. Just simply recognize that that is love. And if you want to use your qualities for love, then they're going to make you, using those qualities correctly, that's going to make you feel happier, and you're just going to be a happier person in the world, and you're going to treat people lovingly, and that's amazing. Or you could choose to use your gift to help mankind, to use humanity. Sometimes we get those opportunities as well. And so isn't that incredible? You're contributing. But then when we see that someone else has a gift, and a talent, which every single person does, everyone has something, and if not more, and just so incredible. But when we start to see that in other people, I acknowledge that you're really incredible at that. That's wonderful. You're acknowledging that we all have love within us and those qualities. And what we acknowledge in others, we're acknowledging in ourselves. What we feed in others, we're feeding within ourselves, because we're all connected. So, just taking a step back from that false pride and just recognizing that whatever you can offer to the world, is beautiful and amazing, but just the same, other people are doing that too. So I always say, don't be jealous, be inspired. Right? So celebrating what others, have and what we have, and not making a big deal of it, not making a big deal of our differences, because in reality, we are all one. And so we want to start treating each other as such. So how do we overcome the ego? So as I shared, you don't want to fight it. You don't want to attack it. I mean, there's a lot of people who are like, oh my goodness, point out your ego, kick it to the curb, get rid of that, F it. No, that's attacking it. That's making it real, right? And, don't think that it's your friend. Just don't think that it's anything. Just don't make too much of it. Recognize that it is something that's, at work in this world, and that the more you invest in it, the stronger it's going to be. And just start to take steps back away from it. Just start to gently recognize where it's working in your life. And as Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, simply move beyond the ego. It's okay. I recognize that. Let's just move beyond it. It's all good. So it's a very gentle undoing process. So just that's one way how you can overcome it, is just starting to become aware of where it's showing up in your life. And, also what I share with my students is that when we're here on this physical plane, I really believe that what we're doing is we're rekindling our relationship with the God mind, right? With the love mind. And that's a beautiful thing. So we can start to just invest in those more core beliefs of love, that we are all connected, and the God mind, that we are so much bigger than what the ego would ever tell us. And this is another reason why I want to, bring clarity to what the ego is, because when you start to identify with what you really are, what you truly are, you're going to experience so much more love and healing and inner peace and joy, like genuine qualities of love. And I think that's a beautiful experience which we all deserve. So that is what I have to say about the ego. I hope I brought clarity as to what it is not, and I hope I brought clarity as to what it is. As I shared earlier, it's just about training the ego mind to quiet down. So, this is why people do value meditation, and yoga and things like that, because they help to train the mind to calm down. And if those aren't for you, that's totally fine. We all have our thing going on. So, you know yourself best. Whatever you can do to help, calm down your ego mind, just to relax. I personally love to laugh to cut the seriousness of the ego, so I'm a big fan of watching comedies, and then I'm also actually a huge fan of connecting with God. I connect with God the moment I wake up. I feel the connection throughout the day, and it's very personal. It's in the privacy of my own mind. I'm not rocking anyone else's boat by doing it. It's just, that's one thing that I happen to do. And then other people like mindfulness techniques and so forth. So, whatever it looks like for you, you're your own person. You're welcome to do that. You're working within what you know about your mind and your likes and your dislikes, and that's perfectly fine. So, you're always welcome to just be perfectly who you are, and that is perfect love. So again, thank you so much for checking out this podcast on what the ego is not and what it is, and I look forward to connecting with you at my website, www.fionamaria.ca, and I trust that you'll have a beautiful day. Thank you.